Well, I am super excited to be here with Victor and Chi-Ming. This is going to be a really exciting conversation. They've been here with us for a couple of days in a couple of different settings. So, first of all, thanks for being here.
It's been a pleasure. It's been so great to be warmly hosted by Upper House.
And Vic, thank you for being here as well. Just really appreciate all that you guys have done and brought to our community. I would love to learn about your friendship. Let's start there today. How did you two meet? What brought your lives together?
Yeah, Vic,
Yeah, I had heard of Chi-Ming. I first had known his brother, who was a venture capitalist, and I was an entrepreneur. And there are not many out-of-the-closet Christians in the tech world, and so I felt like I was always trying to hunt for them. And when you find a few, you kind of latch onto them. And I'm trying to remember if that's actually how I first got acquainted with you. But I know it came with the story of it's a church, that's a tech company, that's a school. And I was just like, what? I have to meet them. And also specifically, at that point in time, I was really trying to interview intentional communities who were making commitments to rootedness together in an area. And I had heard of these sort of well-to-do techies that all decided to move into the Bayview together, which is one of the worst parts of San Francisco. And I thought, who in the world would do that? And so then I had reached out, I think, to Chi-Ming on that premise.
Yeah, and I remembered, we were trying to remember who else was there in the conversation, but I do remember sitting in Dayspring's office in our conference room and just having a conversation and thinking, Victor's like really earnest Christian trying to wrestle with like significant questions about what it means to be an entrepreneur and how it might live faithfully as a Christian entrepreneur. So, and then probably there's a gap in time from then and then until more recently, Victor and his family started coming to Redeemer and decided to kind of join the church. So our relationship since then has developed around actually just helping to serve in leading the church in this time. So Victor's on part of the team that is planning worship. He and I switch off alternate months where the worship service coordinator, so kind of planning the litanies and working with the preachers and things like that. So
yeah,
that's been really fun.
Mm-hmm. Actually, that's part of what I think I'm very grateful about of you bringing us out here is that we both have spent so much time thinking about our faith expressed through our work, but that's actually not how we've connected. We've connected over just like house chores at church, and then just even flying here and thinking about these talks, you're like, oh, I've just really, really been enriched by a lot of Redeemer's thinking and then Chi-Ming's thinking on all this stuff, and a lot of which I've been exposed to even for the first time through this process.
Oh, that's great. Sometimes when we have to teach, we learn and really engage principles in a way that is much deeper. So I'm glad that being out here forced some of that. And some new conversations. So you've known each other maybe 10 years, I'm just to get the timeline, and then the last 4 years you've been at Redeemer?
Yeah, the last 3 or 4 years is when we've really spent time together.
Okay.
That conversation was like 7 or 8 years ago.
7 or 8.
Yeah, gap in between.
Sounds good. Chi-Ming, I wonder for our listeners, if you could just give a quick snapshot of the ecology of what's happening in the Bayview-Hunters Point neighborhood.
Sure. Just kind of briefly, Redeemer was sent out from another congregation in the Mission District of San Francisco and sent out with the understanding that the church is blessed to be a blessing. And so Redeemer was 33 adults and 12 kids that were sent out and kind of figuring out where to be, decided in 2003 to move to the Bayview neighborhood. And at that point is more kind of like where was space available. But over the years, progressively beginning to understand kind of call to presence in the Bayview as more of a vocational thing than an accidental thing. It was not just that, oh, well, here's a place where we can lease space, but instead that God was actually inviting Redeemer to plant itself in the Bayview. And so in 2012, then Dayspring's lease was coming up, and Redeemer was outgrowing space in the Missionary Baptist Church where Redeemer was renting space, and we decided to move in together. And there's kind of a story around that. But the short of it is that we decided to move in together to share space, and together wanting to also imagine what might grow out of our partnership. And so concretely kind of leaving some space in the building for whatever might come out of our imagination in that. And as the church and the business were partnering together in different ways, there was a group of teachers within Redeemer who had spent decades teaching in the public schools. And felt like one of the issues that God was putting on their heart was to address some of the educational inequities in the Bayview-Hunters Point neighborhood. So at that point, there were schools that were closing down. Bayview schools were some of the more under-resourced schools in the neighborhood, are in the city. And students from the Bayview neighborhood, which is one of those neighborhoods that actually has the most families in the city, were busing out of the neighborhood in order to access quality education. And in some cases, that meant bus rides of like an hour each way. And so those teachers started Rise Prep as a school that would have 80% of its seats reserved for first-generation, low-income, and Bayview scholars. And would fundraise 90% of its funds as a flipped model in order to make a quality education accessible for folks from a variety of backgrounds. And so that's essentially kind of in a nutshell the story.
And there's so much that's come out of that. We'll talk probably a little later about the Neighbor Fund and some other things. In a very short couple of paragraphs, tell me about the Bayview-Hunters Point neighborhood. What traditionally has it been like, and how is it changing?
Yeah, so Bayview-Hunters Point has historically, there's a history that goes back to the Ramaytush Ohlone, but in recent decades has been African-American neighborhood, the last probably African-American neighborhood in San Francisco. And that's kind of it over a period of time where the population, the Black population in San Francisco has gone from 16% to like less than 6%, and it's designated as the African American Cultural and Arts District in San Francisco. But at this point, it's also roughly a third Asian, a quarter Black, a quarter Latino, and 10% white. It is a place where there's probably most families, like I said, in the city. But at the same time, almost a quarter of children live below the federal poverty line, and only about half of folks have only high school education or less, and that's about double the rate anywhere else or the average of the city.
Great. That's really helpful. Thank you. Well, you both started technology firms, and I'd like to start as we do a deeper dive into this conversation about leadership and just your understanding of business, the purpose of business. How do each of you think about the risk and reward continuum? And I'm particularly interested how your faith has informed that perspective. And maybe, Vic, we'll start with you.
That's evolved a lot for me over time. So maybe I'll start with where I started and where I think I am now. And maybe for context, I was building a startup called 5 Stars and then 10 plus years, sold it, was at the choir for a couple years. Then I've been on a 1-year sabbatical doing a lot of reflection also for what does my next company look like. When I started, I used to think that most humans are actually not very risk-seeking, and that a lot of the extra value generated in life was through risk tolerance. That if you are risk tolerant, you get an exceptionally large premium, well beyond what that additional risk should return. A simple example is if you're the founder of a company, you get a massive amount of equity. If you're the first employees, that amount of equity already drops off precipitously. And then if you don't have the risk tolerance for that, and you're like the next few employees after it's become more stabilized, it drops off another cliff from there. And so there is this exponential return to risk. So small increase in risk tolerance generates a massive return. And so that was how I used to think about risk and reward, that in general, calculated risk, or even sometimes uncalculated risk, is massively rewarded in the system of capitalism that we live in. I think the way it evolved over the years and where it is now is that what is risk and what does reward even mean? All right. And so what actually prompted me to start 5 Stars was, and at that time I was pursuing my resume. I wanted to like look really good to my Asian parents and other friends and all sorts of stuff. And I wanted these things. And I was realizing, if I literally quit my job to start a company, I've been gifted a set of skills where in the worst case, I can like go work a 9 to 5 somewhere and make a living. And the worst case, I could go to McDonald's and make a living. What kind of risk am I actually taking? I'm actually taking zero risk by leaving my job, because God has landed me in this massively privileged position where I live in the 21st century in the United States with a certain set of circumstances and beliefs and background. That's the card I've been dealt. I could have been like born as a woman in the 1800s in like Europe or like a third world country, right? And so within the context of what I've been given, I'm taking zero risk. And so the risk continuum is already very different. Therefore, I should just do what God is calling you to. Go start a company. The worst case is not a worst case. So the idea of risk changed a lot. And then the idea of reward changed a lot, from the perspective of like, if I actually believe in the Bible, like not just go to church on Sunday, if I actually believe that in the blink of an eye, I'm going to be with my Father in heaven, looking back on all this. And like money, my couch, all this crap is like a rounding error and exceedingly temporary, then it's actually very illogical to chase any of that as a reward. And how can I even begin to measure or think about kingdom reward? And so I think all of that has distilled down into a framework that now is actually no longer about risk and reward, but about the question of quiet, simple obedience, because neither of those concepts are sensical entirely in a kingdom frame or eternal frame.
Thank you. Very helpful. Chi-Ming.
Yeah, I really appreciate kind of the quiet, simple obedience. In some ways, I would say that I'm an accidental entrepreneur. I was never actually expecting to be an entrepreneur. So my college degree was in electrical engineering. I thought, I'm going to work as an engineer. But then there was some sense that, I wanted to do software consulting. So felt like the cool thing to do as somebody that just graduated from college is to move to the city, join a software consulting firm. And but then at the same time, there was also a sense that there was a call of God to serve and to love the poor. And that was something that was formed out of an experience that I had living in the urban core of Oakland for 6 weeks in a summer as part of one of the InterVarsity's programs. And so I actually didn't really know how those two things kind of fit together. Okay, so software consulting, and yet there's this call to serve the poor. And it did become clear, though, as it was discerning kind of the next move after college, that actually I should move to San Francisco. I should take this software consulting job. What I didn't realize was that kind of 2 months into that job, and so I was trained as an electrical engineer, so software was actually something that was not in the cards, and wasn't something that I had, like, our software consulting wasn't something that I had experience with. But 2 months after moving to San Francisco, my roommate at the time said, "Oh, you should talk to Danny Fong. He's thinking about starting a business for ministry." Or a business for the common good, as we might talk about it now. And it turned out that in the 2 months that I was there, I was learning to write, that I was part of this consultancy. I was learning to write web software. And when I talked to Danny was like, "Oh yeah, well, we're going to," or not web software at the time. Oh, the web didn't exist maybe. Or it did just barely exist. But Danny said, "Oh, what the business is going to be is software consulting." And I was like, "That's crazy." So it was very clear that this was the reason why the Lord had kind of nudged me into that. So I think that's kind of the accidental entrepreneur part.
Yeah.
So part of that is related to kind of the risk reward question, because I don't think I ever actually went into entrepreneurship with any kind of frame about financial risk and reward. We did put money into the company, but at the same time, so did members of the congregation that knew that we were starting this business for the common good. They lent us the bulk of the money for the company, and so that kind of foundational structuring at the beginning really reconfigured how we thought about the money that we were putting in.
Yeah. I'd like to explore the business models of both of your businesses. Talk a little bit about Dayspring. What's the business model? What's unique about the business model? And then we'll turn to Vic and his most recent startup.
So Dayspring in some ways is your typical digital consultancy. So we are a professional services business. We do brand and website work, and also build custom software, bespoke kind of development. We also have a business, a good budget business, which is our household financial app business. So, in some ways, kind of typical software company. The model, though, the way that we speak of it is that if we do professional quality work at market rates, but if we're willing to take below market salaries on the whole, averaged across the company, then that should create a delta, a margin that can be directed toward the common good. So that's kind of, that's the basic model for Dayspring.
Good. Vic, how about 5 stars?
So I don't know how many people are familiar, but if anyone's ever walked into like a restaurant or coffee shop or bakery and seen a tablet on the counter that says, "What's your phone number?" And you've entered your phone number for rewards or something else, and that was probably our company. We're one of the largest rewards networks in the U.S., the largest for small businesses. And the mission was twofold. One was this idea of redeeming commerce and making it more relational. There's this idea that we used to shop in Main Street. People remember our name. They literally trust you to the point you could put things on a tab. And now you're a disembodied credit card number where, for even a small business, they know you less well than Amazon and Google does, where they and we lamented the lack of personalization. And the second was that small businesses are going out of business at record rates. And if you think about equality, you think about the American dream, the ability to come here and make something. If the possibility for small business dies, as it is dying, and they are unable to compete with chains, then that whole dream is dead. And so the business was effectively oriented around how do we make the small business distinctive of relationships with your customers. How do we empower them to do that more and allow them to compete? And so as part of that, we had hardware, software where we charged typical SaaS type monthly fee. And then we also later expanded into payments, because payments was a way we felt like we could monetize, but we could monetize out of someone else's pocket, the payment networks, instead of the small business. And for us, it was always this tension of having to hit certain growth rate hurdles to satisfy venture capitalist investors versus trying to minimize prices for the small businesses we're trying to serve. And a lot of, frankly, tension, heartache around that throughout time.
Good. Very helpful. Both businesses located in start off in the San Francisco kind of tech financial sector, right? In the downtown district. And then the stories start to change over time, and we're going to get into that. Before we get into entrepreneurship and the structural changes related to your business, I'd like to explore your sort of big picture understanding of leadership and how you think about leadership. And I want to dial back a little bit and have you think about your earlier life. It doesn't have to be childhood, but your earlier life. What was a formative experience in your life? Could be a person, could be an event that stands out in your mind as shaping the way you think about leadership and what leaders can be and do in the world?
My father's example was actually what kind of comes to mind immediately. Specifically, that basically after, so we I grew up in the church. We rented space from a larger congregation, and there were always chairs to be set up and to be put away every Sunday. And one of my endearing pictures is observing my dad always being a person that would put up chairs,
Yeah.
set them out. And my dad was a deacon in the church. I only probably found out much later in life that he managed an organization, managed a business unit of like 120 engineers, developing satellite technology. And, but what I saw of him was that the way that he led was that he served and that he put up chairs. And so, I mean, even to this day, I think I'm a little uncomfortable if I see people putting up chairs and I'm not also putting up chairs. So, last night when we were at the close of
You were quick to chip in. I noticed.
right. It's like, it just makes me uncomfortable if, so I think just kind of that leaders need to lead by example, and that example is an example of service.
Yeah. Great. Wonderful model. Vic, how about you?
I don't have a great example. I do have a situation that's been etched into my memory, but I actually think a lot of my journey has been as an Enneagram 8 and a very rebellious kid, not caring about what anyone's doing, not wanting to listen to anyone, and being very self-absorbed. A process over time of God beating me into submission with a baseball bat. And I think that's been more my arc. But I would say one specific memory of leadership that's been really etched into my mind is growing up in a household where my mom is Christian, my dad, not really, immigrant family, very miserly. We lived on $100 a week for a family of 4. So just, you pinch every penny. And come Sunday, my mom would want to take $20, which is a big percentage of, 20 on top, so 100, and the two take another 20, and want to put it in the offering basket. And my dad, who didn't go to church, but he saw my mom taking the money on the way out, would just be like, "What are you doing?" And then my mom, who usually would just kind of maybe be pushed over for most things, when it came to this, would stand up in a fiery way, or almost just ignore him, honestly, and just I'm doing this. And she would take the $20 and walk out. And that picture of what I actually never associated with leadership until you just asked that question is burned into my memory.
Mm-hmm.
So a very funny kind of anecdote is that we found out that my parents knew Victor's parents.
Oh yeah.
At the church in West Los Angeles
Wow.
that they were at together, and this is decades ago. And so when I was telling them about, there's this new family at church, and Victor and Jess, and I don't know who made the connection, but
My mom did.
your mom made
Yeah,
the
because my
connection.
mom went to this church in East LA, not even where we are now, Southern California. I think Chi-Ming was 8 years old, 10 years old. I don't remember at the
younger
time.
than that, yeah.
And I had mentioned Chi-Ming, and she's like, "Oh, you mean the 3 brothers?" And I was like, "What?" And she's like, "Yeah, really small, smart, really smart, small eyes, happy." I was like, "I guess." And then yeah.
And then my parents said, "Oh, the 3 sisters, right? Because your mom was one of 3."
Yeah, and so they were good friends with his parents. Anyway, neither here nor there, but it was just kind of a
amazing.
crazy coincidence.
What a great story. The way your paths have really intertwined over many decades through your parents. So that's a really helpful glimpse of leadership. How does leadership translate into culture? What constitutes a healthy culture? What are signs of vitality, and conversely, what are signs of that something's amiss?
I think the way, and I've talked about this with our company, the way that I view like what it looks like for the company to be functioning well together is actually a model that I learned from the summer camp that the church ran. And so Judy Appleby was kind of led the camp, and a bunch of folks from the church. This is actually Grace Fellowship, so this is prior to Redeemer, the church that planted Redeemer. But a bunch of folks in the congregation would take time off work and help run summer camp. And so there'd be different parts of summer camp. There's like the team that's leading the music. There's the team that's working on the craft. There's the team that's serving snacks. And there's the team that's preparing, preparing to tell the story. And one of the things that Judy talked about was that we each need to very much do the part that we're given to do and to do it well. But that's not, the point of it is not just to do your part well. The point is to kind of serve the whole camp, right? So after, I would help lead music on the guitar, and after I led music, then during snack time, rather than kind of a bunch of folks kind of standing off to the side, we'd all serve snacks, but we'd follow the lead of the people that were doing that. And so I think this is really, for me, it was like a picture of taking kind of really core responsibility for the things that are given to you to do, but also participating participating in kind of in what other folks are leading and following their leadership, and all of that in service of the whole. So I think, to me, like when that kind of thing is happening, that's what I feel like is healthy. And then unhealthiness becomes like when there's competition between teams, right? There's inevitable frictions that come up in coordination, but how can we do that in a way that's not like fundamentally competitive?
Right. Yeah, very helpful. Vic, any additional thoughts on that?
I love that picture of the summer camp. I love the picture both because it's an unpretentious metaphor, and also because it's a metaphor of people filling roles in service to fill a need, versus I feel like when a lot of companies get too large and they start to get bureaucratic and really slow down, it's because it becomes this like more pretentious, we're super important, making up all these roles. You start doing things to like fill a role, justify your existence, sound fancier than you are. You just start making stuff up, versus like, if we could just operate like the summer camp, like, does this job actually have to be done? Or you like, it would be so much better. So I really love that picture, and resonate with it very much. One other angle, is completely unrelated, that I would take it down is when I think about the question, what is leadership? For me, it became, and particularly Christian leadership, if you believe that our call in the marketplace is part restoring the world to human flourishing, Eden, so forth, and the Great Commission. What does it look like for me as a leader to represent that? And where I had started was the opposite, trying to chase invulnerability, not on purpose, but like I was so nervous that, you've got this startup, and there's a scene from Gladiator that I've always resonated with where Maximus Aurelius says, like, Rome was but a dream, but a whisper. You could but whisper it, because you would feel like if you said it too loudly, it would crumble. And so I felt like all the time I had to shoulder the morale of the company. I had to put on the best view of things. I had to like paint the path for why it's going to be okay. And one is I broke down because I just couldn't shoulder that. But two, I realized it was both silly, not effective, and not missional. And what I think I began to move to was this view of leadership as deep vulnerability and authenticity. And specifically this idea that the truest thing about me, the most remarkable thing about me, is God's fingerprints on my soul when he molded and shaped it before the formation of the foundation of the universe was laid. And every time I try to put on a face, act polished, be excellent, like I'm covering that up. And the most powerful moments of 5 stars were all the moments when I was broken down, and in weakness, the cracks between this facade showed and God could shine through. And so I think about moments like when we had to do layoff and I felt like a complete failure. And then I had to decide, am I going to put on a rah-rah speech, or am I going to like read my journal about feelings of inadequacy and reliance on like, okay, what might God be doing, and so forth. And just in a lot of the day-to-day moments, of course, there's the times when you do have to be the strong general charging the hill, motivating people. And I think that's almost table stakes, but I think the real power is in the moments of failure and weakness that get exposed and that you let exposed to the team. And if I think about healthy culture and, take the summer camp from this other portion of what the summer camp might look like, it would be creating an environment where people are comfortable in their own skin. The imago Dei that is inherent in every Christian and non-Christian can come through, and there's this permission to vulnerability and authenticity.
Yeah, that's really insightful. My next question was going to be about failure, but I think your responses made me think about it in a couple different ways. I do think, at least I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, they are comfortable with failure organizationally. I mean, they go through that. In some ways, it's part of your CV or resume to have had a failure. So the industry recognizes it in ways that maybe other industries don't recognize it. But Vic, you've really pushed a deeper level of that, and that is failure with respect to our own self-identity, the things that we hold sacred in our own lives, our it might be our reputation, our parents' approval, other kinds of things. So it seems to me there's multiple layers of failure in the startup project, and not just organizationally, but there is a deep personal level, and that personal level is something that requires a high degree of vulnerability and authenticity, and that isn't maybe naturally easy to succumb to.
Mm-hmm.
Is that an accurate depiction of how you've experienced it?
Yes. I think it's different for different personality types. For me, I'm a people pleaser. I get really insecure about what people think about me. I want people to think I'm smart. I want people who...
I think you're smart, Vic.
Thanks, Chu. People take big pay cuts to work for a startup. We also had a specific philosophy around never paying up. There's lots of, for cultural reasons, lots of other things. And so a lot of people who took, when you compare to Google or Facebook, these places paying them $1 million a year and then taking like a 70% pay cut or something more, to come, like not wanting to fail this trust that's bestowed. And there's many points where, it was just very hard for me to fail, like for people pleasing reasons, for self-identity reasons, for all sorts of stuff. And so I think for me, it was really a coming to terms with my own limitedness, certainly limited relative to the God of space, time, the universe. And also too, like this hero complex. It's like, why do I have this hero complex where I feel so responsible for like, oh, I can't let this person be fired. Like, no, we need to do like everything we can to rehabilitate them, and like giving people second, third, 10th chances. And a lot of that I do think is really good and comes from a heart of a good place. But then there's a line of like, you're not God. Like that is God's daughter and that is God's son. And there's a point at which I've done right by them. And there's a point where I'm not just doing them a disservice, because there's a better place for them to be. There is a different care for them, and there's some sort of Messiah complex of like, so I don't know, this is not a clear answer, but there's a lot of the muddled cocktail of emotions when you talk about failure.
One of the things that I think about on that is that, you were talking about you're not God and Messiah complex. One of the fundamental ways that I've come to understand the Jesus testing in the wilderness is acknowledgement of limitation. It's actually accepting of vulnerability, and that the path of being truly human is actually to acknowledge limitation. So whether it's kind of limitation of not providing for your, or being able to provide for your own needs and physical needs, or not kind of avoiding kind of the spectacle or not being the ruler of the universe, right? It really is like acknowledging limitation and vulnerability. And I think so in some ways, like that is actually the path that God chooses, that Jesus chooses. And yeah.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Did you want to add anything?
I was just going to build on what Chi-Ming said, because I think it was one of the most cathartic things for me and for maybe my personality and where I came from, is there's this illusion of success. And what I mean by that is I happen to be designed or good at business, and the world seems to value that, and so they think I'm successful. But what if we lived in a world that really valued art? I'm terrible at art. What if we lived in a world that really valued being good at Tetris? I'm not good at Tetris. There's many other universes where what I'm good at could be completely insignificant, and where someone else could be like the lauded thing. And then on top of that, you think, okay, well, I've sold a company for a few $100 million. That's a good thing. But also there's sort of this question of like, well, what was the hand I was even dealt, right? Like, and, born in a certain place, time in history, a certain set of head starts and all sorts of stuff, a lot of luck, because most of it is just frankly blind luck. And one of the most cathartic moments for me was we were selling the company for $317 million. And I was lamenting that I hadn't been able to build a unicorn. I was like, I thought I was supposed to build this $1 billion company, take it public. It was going to last a long time. And I'm like, dude, what is wrong with you? Like, this is the most entitled thought any human has ever had. Like, my company's not worth $1 billion. I'm a failure. Like, God, what is going on? I'm like, dude, you are such like a head, And I'm just walking around the neighborhood, just like preaching to my soul, Victor, you are thoroughly mediocre. For the hand of cards you were dealt that you're holding, you like maybe a B+ at best, right, with this hand. And you know what? That's beautiful, and God loves you. And and just I was joking that I'm making a doormat that says you are mediocre. So every time I cross the threshold of my house, I can let mediocrity preach to my soul. Anyway, but that's what Chi-Ming, when you say that.
I haven't done our staff Christmas gift this year. It might be good.